I'm going to talk about implementing Ontario's approach to EPR. You heard from Charles about what the policy objective is and the policy framework that we operate under, and so I want to spend some time talking about how we've actually gone about implementing the tire regulation and how we go about implementing our compliance function. And I'm going to stop at various points for questions. I hope there's questions, and we'll keep going through this until we get eventually to John, who's going to talk a bit about how we protect your data, and then to Roger, who's going to talk a bit about what the Competition Bureau does. So I'm going to start with what is extended producer responsibility. I know that there's a lot of people in this room who already know what that is, and there will be some people who are just wondering what exactly that is. So basically, it's an economic and environmental strategy, a policy that's been around for since the 1980s, started being implemented in various jurisdictions beginning in the 90s, and continues to be implemented in jurisdictions around the world. And basically, it comes down to the responsibility for producer is extended to the part of the life cycle of their products after the consumer is finished with that product. That's all it means, and it's been around for a while, and it's been implemented, as I say, in very many jurisdictions. We now see EPR programs all over Europe, United States, Canada, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Australia, to name a few, and other countries are starting to come on board as well. About 400 EPR programs exist around the world. So what does it look like in Canada? Well, in Canada, we've got about 80 versions of EPR in various stripes that apply to a range of materials, tires, batteries, electronics, and a variety of other materials that in Ontario we kind of bundle into municipal hazards and special wastes. A number of implementation models, the IFO model that we saw in Ontario. This is the industry funding organization that gave rise to the Ontario Tire Stewardship, Stewardship Ontario, and the Ontario Electronics Stewardship. There's pro models in different parts of Canada. There's the IPR model that we're going to talk about today. We see vendor take-back programs. The beer store is an example of that. Deposit return programs as well. Steward group plans, where stewards have grouped together on a voluntary basis or presented plans to a regulator to say, we'd like to do this ourselves. Here's our plan. What do you think? And we have some closed loop systems like SodaStream, for example. The canisters that you use in the SodaStream product goes back to SodaStream, and you buy a new one, and you keep using the same canisters over and over again. So, in Ontario, we had 4 EPR programs under the Waste Diversion Transition Act, initially established under predecessor legislation. So there was a program for tires. There continues to be one for electronics and for municipal hazards and special waste, and of course the blue box that we're all familiar with. As Charles indicated, the tires program transitioned to IPR starting on January 1st of this year. So we're almost at the end of the first performance year for that program. And of course, again, as Charles indicated, letters of direction have been issued by the minister to transition the remaining programs, with batteries planned to transition on July 1st of 2020, and the remainder of those MHSW programs transitioning July 1st of 2021. And electronics will be transitioning January 1st of 2021, and the blue box process has started with anticipated transition beginning January 1st, 2023. So, what is individual producer responsibility? Starting point is, it's still extended producer responsibility. The fundamental principle is unchanged. Producers are responsible for the entire life cycle of their products and packaging, including that part of the life cycle when the consumer is finished with it. Under the IPR approach, the end-of-life costs are fed back to each individual producer instead of being imposed on general taxpayers and municipalities or on a collective basis. Before EPR happened, waste was collected from consumers, went to landfills. Landfills were paid for by municipal taxpayers, and producers bore no responsibility for any part of that. So with IPR, there's now an incentive for producers, given their individual responsibility for managing their products, to manage those post-consumer costs by, for example, developing better designs, making more efficient use of resources, making those resources more easily recoverable. And of course, individual producers, when they make those investments, they get to benefit from those investments when they make those innovations. And without IPR, those incentives for design improvements are lost. What does IPR look like in Ontario? The key elements are, first of all, it's outcome-based regulation. Charles talked about that. You have the freedom to meet the requirements in an open market, which allows you to achieve cost efficiency and to foster innovation. And then there's improved oversight to verify environmental outcomes. Under the pre-existing programs in Ontario, the targets that were set for the IFOs were not enforceable targets. They were paid for by producers, but they weren't enforceable, and individual producers didn't have individual responsibility within the IFO regime. So how does outcome-based regulation work? We have the first example, the tires regulation. Essentially, the way it works is the producer reports what it supplies into the Ontario market. Now, this isn't a new feature because of IPR. I mean, producers have always had to report in what they're supplying into markets under EPR regimes. But when we get that data is then used to establish that producer's individual resource recovery target, and that's where we get into the individual part. Now, having received this individual target, what do you do in order to achieve it? So the producer can arrange to meet its target by contracting with a producer responsibility organization or a PRO. It can contract with a range of service providers directly. It can create its own solution. But this is all in a marketplace. And at the end of the day, when you're finished meeting your target, as a producer, you have to report your performance results to the authority. And you can do that either directly if you managed your own solution, or your PRO or your service provider can do that on your behalf if you contracted with them to carry out performance obligations on your behalf. So the producer or the service providers, the PRO or whomever, can report on those performance outcomes. So we're in a new world. This graphic shows the relationship between the authority and the players in that marketplace. So producers have to register and report to RPRA. PROs have to register, and they have reporting obligations as well. And service providers have to register, and they have some reporting requirements as well. So this gives us a line of sight at 3 different parts of the marketplace, and then that allows us to test the validity of what we're seeing reported by those 3 groups of participants. We also have a very important set of relationships that we're not part of, and that's how producers and PROs and service providers interact with one another. These are contractual relationships, so if you're a producer, you're going to have to figure out who you need to contract with. If you're a PRO and you're arranging for performance, you're going to have to figure out what service providers you have to contract with. If you're a service provider and you want to be in the business of meeting the producer responsibility, you have to figure out which PROs and which producers you want to contract with. But it's all driven by a marketplace that you're all participating in. We're looking at what's going on in the marketplace, but we're not regulating that marketplace. The Competition Bureau is also looking at what's going on in that marketplace, and they may well regulate what's going on there. We'll hear a bit more from Roger about how that works. So cost efficiency is really, really important. One of the features of IPR is the ability to achieve cost efficiency. And so we made sure that when we designed the registry for tires that it was built with all of the flexibility that was needed in order to support a competitive marketplace. So we understood that there was a range of possibilities that a producer could engage in. It could establish its own solution to meet its performance obligation. It could contract directly with service providers. It could contract with a PRO. It could contract with multiple PROs. It could change PROs at any time and during the process, in year, over years, it didn't matter. So we built the registry to accommodate all of those possible permutations of arrangements. And that means that producers are no longer locked into a single service provider. In the OTS world, the Ontario Tire Stewardship world, Every tire steward was reporting directly to OTS, and OTS was really the only service provider in town. OTS took care of contracting with haulers and collectors and processors, but the stewards could only deal with OTS. So now you have the opportunity to deal with anybody you want that will meet your business objectives in this new marketplace. And you can do it collectively, you can do it individually. The marketplace is available for everybody to do what they need to do. And so pros are a lot like the original stewardships, but they're competing with one another for producer business. And that's where you're going to get cost efficiency. If you have a range of pros available in the marketplace and a range of service providers available in the marketplace, then you have a lot of choice in how to meet your producer obligations. And that means the producers can then reap the benefit of the investments that they make in design improvements that will lead to more efficient resource recovery. It means that people can offer to recover resources more efficiently and compete for your business as well. And ultimately, that allows producers to benefit from cost efficiency. Fostering innovation is also a very important aspect of the new world. The existence of a competitive market means that there's now an opportunity for new technologies and service providers to enter the Ontario resource recovery market. And this is how we pave the way to achieving better value out of recovered resources. And in the TIRES program, in year one, much earlier than I think we had hoped, we're already starting to see this happen. We have a company called Rubberjet Canada that's registered with us now. That they're in the process of setting up a new tire processing technology in Windsor. And not only is it a new technology, but they're adding to our processing capacity that's available within Ontario and creating new jobs in this sector in Ontario. CRM, and Andrew is going to be talking about his views of how the world is working under the tire world, is from CRM later on. They have a market-ready mobile plant for rubberized asphalt that allows them to extract value from used rubber and incorporate it into asphalt that leads to roads that last longer and weather the changes in the temperature changes in Ontario in particular much more efficiently. So they're working on improving that end of the market. Cal Tire, along with being a major retailer of tires in Ontario, is also in the retreading business. And they've taken technology that was developed here in Ontario at the University of Waterloo to come up with a way of incorporating up to 30% of used rubber into the retreads that are put onto medium truck tires and extending the life of those medium truck tires. So lots of opportunities that are starting to take shape in this new world. The Rubberjet folks were really upfront. They said the only reason we came to Ontario was IPR was happening in Ontario that gave them the opportunity to come here. And when we look at what's coming in the batteries and electronics world, we already see a number of processes adding additional capacity and additional processes to their existing operations, getting ready to meet the needs of producers once those regulations are finalized. Then we have improved oversight to verify the environmental outcomes. So that's our job as a regulator. The performance requirements are enforceable. So each individual producer is going to be held to the targets that they're required to meet. But in terms of how we approach the compliance problem, it begins with the proposition that for the most part, businesses actually want to comply. I have talked to a broad range of stakeholders in the tire world, and I've yet to come across anybody who says, I don't want to comply. I mean, I'm not sure they would want to say that to me, but generally what we're hearing from them is, what do I need to know? What do I need to do in order to comply, and if I do this, is this compliant? And we're working very closely with stakeholders on those issues. This is what we call communication for compliance. If people know what they need to do, by and large, they will comply. So this is how we get what we call voluntary compliance, and so our communication process becomes really, really critical during a transition year. And the way we implemented that for tires, we had a one-on-one conversation with every potential tire producer who needed to register. And as a result of that one-on-one conversation, we pretty much had 100% compliance with producer registration going into 2019. We didn't have the same success with collectors because there's over 7,000 of them, and there's no way you can have a one-on-one conversation with 7,000 people. And I'll talk a little bit about that challenge in a couple of minutes. We also saw the emergence of 5 producer responsibility organizations and recognized that those pros were going to be key participants in the new marketplace. And so we worked very closely on issue after issue with the producer responsibility organizations, essentially because they represented all of the producers collectively. And so in meeting the collective responsibility for producers, the best place to do that was with the pros. And so we'll talk a bit about that as well. And we'll hear representatives from the pros later on who will share some of their experiences about year one and how it's worked and maybe where it didn't work as well as they'd hoped and so on. So in the event that voluntary compliance doesn't work, of course, we have a number of compliance tools. We can issue compliance orders. We can issue administrative penalty orders. We can carry out prosecutions as well. We haven't done any of this in year one. We haven't even come close to having to consider compliance orders or admin penalty orders in year one. And that's because the industry is working collectively and individually to get into compliance with the new rules and just carry on with what they need to do. One of the things we've heard very clearly from producers is, okay, I'm complying. I want to make sure my competitors also comply. So a level playing field is a critical component of what we do, and so we have been focusing and giving priority to identifying and dealing with free riders. The majority of the free rider cases that we've dealt with so far have been resolved very quickly, mostly because the free riders didn't know that they were free riders and didn't know that they were supposed to register, and once they knew, they did, and so it was kind of a delayed communication for compliance process with them. So we're going to work our way through that, and we're always happy to know if people have a line on somebody they think is a free rider, because we will follow up everything to make sure that there's a level playing field. And the other aspect of this world is that a competitive marketplace has to work properly, and so we constantly consult with the Competition Bureau when we see issues coming up. When we look at things that we're planning to do, we want to talk to the Competition Bureau about how that fits with a competitive market, so that we're staying on our side of the line in terms of a competitive market, but obviously making sure that the regulatory side of the line is working properly in conjunction with that competitive market.